Pixar is one of the most famous animation companies of all time, maybe second only to Disney itself. And for a long time, they were famous for being able to take what seemed to be even the most ridiculous or non-workable premises and turn them into some of the best, most brilliant and touching stories of the new millennium. But, until recently anyway, there's always been one blemish or black sheep among their various movies, with that being Cars 2. Because while even the first Cars movie was considered slightly below Pixar's standards, it was still considered a good movie and worthy addition to their lineup nonetheless. While Cars 2 is infamous for being considered their worst movie, period, and perhaps the only genuinely bad movie the company has ever made. But this has often led me to ask myself, is it really that bad? Because sure, it's no masterpiece and certainly not in the same league as Pixar's best, but is it really as awful as people make it out to be? And there will be spoilers for this movie ahead, so in case you haven't seen it yet but want to, you probably shouldn't proceed with this video. Okay, so just to get my personal opinion out there first, I never hated Cars 2. I actually enjoyed it, and still do to this day. Now once again, I will freely admit that the movie is not the best made ever, and that Pixar can certainly do better than it. But I just don't know if it's the absolutely horrible abomination that some people claim it is. Because when you really look at it, all the movie is trying to be is a fun spy movie with the theme of friendship at its core. And I honestly don't think it does the worst job at it either. Because one thing people have to keep in mind is, for those going into a movie like this expecting Ethan Hunt or James Bond, they're going to be disappointed. Because unlike most Pixar movies, Cars 2 is clearly intended for kids first and foremost. And maybe that's why some people can't stand it, because they're used to Pixar's more mature storytelling style, and it's not all that prominent here. But the point is, because the movie is for kids, it obviously doesn't use certain things the spy angle offers to its fullest advantage, as they were obviously trying to keep it G-rated. Now, some have also argued that the movie shouldn't have gone full spy mode in the first place, and maybe that is true. But the thing is, I think what they did do isn't exactly bad either. You know, the simulator, the gadgets, that's pretty fun stuff, especially for a kid. What I'm trying to say is, as a spy movie for kids, I believe it actually does a pretty good job. Sure, maybe certain things about the Lemons plot, as well as emphasizing that not all lemons are bad and that they were wrong to take the approach they did, could have been done better, but it's not like it doesn't work. I mean, Michael Caine as the head of a British spy ring? Tell me that isn't a dream come true. Like I said, when you really look at it, this movie does have merit. It's just maybe a little too dumbed down for some people. But once again, I do believe that as a kids movie, it actually succeeds better than a lot of other Pixar movies. So it really depends on the perspective of the individual viewer and what they're expecting from it. Now, I know a lot of people also have an issue with Mater as the lead, but the thing is, I never found him annoying. If you do, that's absolutely fine, but I always found his innocence and kindness pretty endearing. And because of that, maybe I can just see where they were coming from with putting him into such a setting, because the way the spies operate, combined with his sweet to a fault nature, does actually work as a great contrast to each other. And his knowledge of different cars and how they work actually being a benefit to the spies, again, I just find that whole thing to be surprisingly believable. Though I will concede that McMissile and Shiftwell mistaking him for a spy and continuing to believe that he is one is a little far-fetched and could have been done better. Because again, I'm not trying to say that the movie doesn't have flaws, just that it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. But getting back to Mater, I also think his dynamic with McQueen also works surprisingly well. Because in the first movie, Mater is one of the only people to give him a chance at first and immediately tries to be his friend, and as a result, McQueen ends up forming a strong bond with him. So in the sequel, we see how Mater tries to cope with wanting to spend time with his busy and famous friend, and how it culminates in Lightning yelling at him when he gets tired of what he perceives as Mater smothering him. And I'm just going to say it, Lightning's guilt after the fact is actually pretty touching. Especially in how he both goes out of his way to apologize to Mater at the climax, and how he even goes as far as to risk his life trusting Fillmore because of what had happened between him and Mater. Again, it may not be Pixar's best attempt at friends falling out, but it's still pretty effective nonetheless, and much more believable than some of their other attempts at it. And not to mention, Mater's existentialism at finding out everybody thinks he's an idiot is also done better, at least in my opinion, than it has any right to. Especially the scene after he's knocked out and all of his insecurities come to a head. It's a surprisingly poignant moment from a character most are quick to write off as annoying comic relief. Because on top of that, it's that scene that finally motivates him to show everybody that he's a lot more than the perpetually screwing up fool that everybody thinks he is. As I said before, this movie does have some merit when you really look at it. You just have to dig deeper than most Pixar movies to find it. But even aside from that, the movie is also pretty funny. Francesco makes for the perfect egomaniac for Lightning's subplot and is constantly spouting one-liners. And I don't care what anybody says, the Wasubi scene is pretty dang hilarious. Because in that instance, it's the fact that Mater is blatantly ignoring all of the obvious warning signs, as well as constantly clarifying that it's free, that makes the payoff all the funnier. Because he's expecting cold, flavorful ice cream, but the audience knows what he's actually in for. And the results are, as I just said, pretty funny. And this bit never fails to crack me up.
What's McQueen's usual?
Come faccio a saperlo?
Perfect. Give me two.
Now, while some might feel that the movie adds a bit too much humor in certain places, I actually think it works for that exact reason. Because as I said before, this is a spy movie for kids, so even though it was never going to get graphic, it still gets pretty dark or upsetting in places, and the humor helps add a balance to it and keeps it from getting too intense for children. So while all the comedy doesn't land, I will freely admit that, I still do believe it was needed simply for the demographic this movie has. Because again, it helps make the darker parts easier for the children to watch. Now, as I've already said a few times, I'm not saying that Cars 2 is Pixar's best movie, because I will happily say it. Everything this movie does good, most of their other movies have done better. I'm just trying to say that when you really stop and look at it, it's not nearly as bad as some people try to say it is. Especially because it does pretty much succeed at being what it's trying to be, which is a fun spy movie for kids. Now, the thing is, I get it. Most people were expecting a more traditional sequel to the original Cars movie and were upset when they didn't get it. And I'm not even trying to say they were wrong for feeling that way. Just that based solely off what it is and has to offer, Cars 2 is not that bad of a movie, at least in my opinion. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that for certain animation studios, Cars 2 would frankly be considered their best movie. And it's mainly down to the fact that it has to compete with Pixar's masterpieces that probably makes it look so bad by comparison. But let me just say, even if I knew nothing about Pixar, I would still have to say that if Cars 2 is considered their worst movie, then Pixar must be one heck of an exceptional studio. Because I just spent the whole video emphasizing, when you really get down to it and just judge the movie based solely off what it is and trying to be, it really isn't all that bad. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that Cars 2 is better than most people give it credit for? Or do you believe it has the reputation that it deserves? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as I noted throughout the video, you do not have to agree with my opinions in this video. You are free to feel absolutely any way you want to about Cars 2 and the reputation it has. And if you think I'm completely wrong, you're absolutely free to. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.